JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Golden Wind.
See wrinkling. Hey guys, what the fuck is up, you guys? My name is eMandan642, and I hate JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. I hate it. It sucks. Goodbye! I'm just kidding. I really like Golden Wind. I really did. It's just, this part can be really dumb at times, but I still very much enjoyed it. So, this is the newest part of JoJo that has been animated. I won't be reviewing parts 6 through 8 yet. I'm taking a bit of a much needed break from JoJo after this. I'll review those parts whenever I feel like it, or whenever they get animated, whichever comes first. So, just like every part before it, Golden Wind is pretty different from each previous part. Which, might I add, I like that Araki doesn't follow a strict pattern for every part. Each part is different enough where they stand out. Part 5 follows the same stand of the week formula as parts 3 and 4, but there is also more of a ever-changing story similar to the early parts. Golden Wind is the most isolated part, I guess. Its story does not follow the story of any previous parts. Part 2 pretty much directly followed and continued the story of the first part. Part 3 didn't continue the story of Part 2, but it brought back Dio. And Part 4, like Part 5, doesn't really have much to do with any of the previous parts, but in that part we are introduced to the stand arrow, and the stands as a whole are expanded upon, along with previous characters like Jotaro and Joseph showing up too. But Part 5 has none of that. Aside from the stand arrow being important, not much is continued from the previous parts. The only thing making this a JoJo story is of course the JoJo, Giarno Giorno. Giorno is the most unique JoJo. All of the previous JoJo's are clear descendants of previous JoJo's, but Giarno is kinda different. He is the son of Dio. Not only Dio, but technically Jonathan as well, because it was when Dio had Jonathan's body during Part 3 that Giarno was conceived. Giarno is an interesting character. A lot of people call him bland and uninteresting, and compared to the previous JoJo's, he kinda is. Now, Giarno is still a great character, but he, to me, does not stand out compared to the previous JoJo's. Part 1 through 3 JoJo's had one clear personality trait that made them who they were. While Josuke was more dynamic, Giarno was even more dynamic, but compared to the other characters around him, he was far less interesting. But if there was one thing I do really like about his character, is the Jonathan versus Dio aspect. Like Jonathan, he is a truly good person who believes in what's good and right. His whole journey in this part is based off of his belief against corruption in the world, or his city. This plays into his stand, Gold Experience, whose ability is to bestow life into inanimate objects. But Giorno has a darker side to him, his Dio side. He has no empathy to his enemies or who he deems as bad, and most of his enemies he straight up kills. In Part 3, the enemy stand users were either killed or they were retired. And in Part 4, the characters just befriended them. But in Part 5, they are annihilated. I mean, they are on a secret mission most of the season. Anyone knowing about said mission is a major threat to them, so them being killed makes sense, but Giorno is quite ruthless in this regard. He has no issue with murdering his enemies. I really like this Jonathan versus Dio dynamic in Giorno. I hope Giorno being Dio's son doesn't become completely pointless in a few episodes. I just wish it was more prevalent. If you don't even think about it, you might not even notice. Especially since Giorno kinda blends into the other characters in the Passione with that trait. Especially Bruno Bucciarati, who I'll talk about when he's introduced. I just wish Giorno's split personality was expanded upon better. Giarno also looks quite a bit different compared to the other JoJo's. The previous JoJo's were huge masculine tanks. Josuke differed quite a bit from this. He was a lot less bulky and a lot less masculine. Giorno was even less bulky and masculine. His stand is not a powerhouse like Star Platinum and even Crazy Diamond. Even his hair is a light blonde, well in the present day, compared to the darker colors of hair that the previous JoJo's had. and even in this story, he takes less of a center role. The previous JoJo's all clearly took the center stage, and that was something I did take issue with when it came to them. But Giarno takes as much of an importance as the supporting characters. He is still the main character, but the other side characters are also equally as important and fleshed out, aside from a few notable exceptions which I'll get to. And in the fights as well, Giarno is the least experienced out of all the Bucciarati crew, and it shows. Unlike the previous JoJo's who obtain their powers and are immediately very strong, Giarno is not as capable at first. He still is very strong. It takes him time to truly hone his skills. Giarno was made to be a puzzle piece to a larger group of characters. This group is the Passione. The cast of Part 3 had the same goal of defeating Dio. The cast of Part 4 all lived in the same town of Morio. They were also good friends besides that. The cast of Part 5 are drawn together by similar tragic backstories of abandonment and isolation, and being brought out of those situations by one person, Bucciarati. Let's first look at Giorno's backstory. So Giorno's father, Dio, abandoned him, leaving his mother to solely take care of him, but she would often leave Giorno alone while she was out. Giorno spent a lot of time as a child abandoned and alone. She eventually married a man who would physically abuse Giorno. One day he accidentally came across a member of the Italian mafia. That man became Giorno's guardian and let him grow into what he is today. Each of the characters in Bucciarati's crew had similar backstories to this, with my personal favorite being Abacchio, who joined the police force to soon realize how corrupt the world is. He then was responsible for the death of his co-worker and friend and was kicked out of the police force. Bucciarati would be the one to help these characters out of their dark pasts and bring them together. I really like this about the group. They all have tragic backstories, and they are all saved from their past to be brought together and made into better people. They are definitely not my favorite cast in the series, and as a whole, they are not perfect, but as a team, they work really well together. Like I mentioned before, rarely are the enemies kept alive. This is way darker than any previous part. I really like how brutal the fights can get, and speaking of the fights, they are the best they've ever been in JoJo so far. We get way more fights with more than two people fighting, whether that be a 1v2, a 2v1, or a 2v2, or whatever it may be. The battles are way more dynamic than they were before. The battles in Part 4 really just felt like scuffles and not much more, but in Part 5, they felt like life or death situations. The characters are basically close to death in almost every single episode, and it's always tense the whole way through. We started the part with Koichi this time, which was surprising to see. Part 3 and 4 started off with the previous JoJo's, and I was expecting the same here, but nope. We got Koichi, which I liked. I sure hope he doesn't become completely irrelevant in a few episodes. He is investigating Giorno to see if he's a threat because he's Dio's son, and then he just kinda stops. Yep, Koichi's in the first few episodes, then he just disappears. I mean, he learns that Giorno is good, so then mission accomplished, but still. If you're going to show up Koichi as the first character in this part, why make him completely irrelevant after only a few episodes? And Jotaro was shown for like 5 minutes and then never again. Joseph was the first character shown in Part 3 and Jotaro in Part 4, but they were both main characters in those respective parts, but why have Koichi show up but then just disappear? I believe that there should be at least one character from a previous part that is somewhat important, but that's just me. They don't have to be a main character, but they should be around. I'll get into more of that later. Giorno encounters Bucciarati and they find out they have the similar goal to rid Italy of the drug trade that is controlled by the boss of Passione. At the same time, the boss, who is unnamed at this point, finds out he has a daughter. The boss, who keeps his identity a complete mystery at all times, is now at risk because he has a daughter. He tasks the capo, Polpo, to protect her. Polpo is the same person who tests Giorno before he is accepted in the Passione. After passing the test, Giorno kills Polpo. His death is labeled suicide. I don't know why no one suspects Giorno killed him because Polpo died immediately after Giorno was accepted, but alright. After setting out to find Polpo's treasure, Bucciarati is now granted the rank of capo after Polpo was killed, and he and his crew are now tasked with protecting the boss's daughter Trish. One thing I really like about Golden Wind is the ongoing story. Part 3 had the central story that was, just go to Egypt and kill Dio. Part 4 didn't really have a story until the second half. The first half was just get the arrow, and the second half was find Kira. Part 5 story is not super complex, but I really like how it changes. Like at first, it's Giarno getting into the Passione, and then it's the gang go and find Polpo's treasure, and then protect Trish, and now bring her to the boss, and then you get the picture. Also, I like how we're back to the adventure style that was in Part 3. It's not as grandiose as in Part 3. The whole story is contained in Italy, but it feels like an adventure. And that is something I love. After Narancia is attacked while getting supplies for Trish, the gang follows the boss's orders back to his hideout. Here we are. Spoilers. Last JoJo part. For now. Spoilers. So they make it to the boss's hideout. Bucciarati and Trish enter the building. This part is very tense, since this is where we as the audience and the characters in the situation are meeting the boss for the first time. Or so we think. While in the elevator rising to the top of the tower, suddenly Trish disappears, only leaving her severed hand. Bucciarati suspects the boss and chases after him. Here we are first introduced to not the boss, but his stand, King Crimson. I love this stand. He is so fucking cool. I may be biased because I love the band King Crimson, but the stand is still very cool. I don't think he is as good as the other villain stands, The World and Killer Queen, but King Crimson is still awesome. The only problem with him is his abilities are not explained well. This introduction to King Crimson is my favorite villain stand introduction yet. I still love Killer Queen. I'd probably say that's my favorite stand, but in terms of stand introductions, King Crimson takes the cake for me. He is intimidating and terrifying. His powers seem to be unmatched. At this point, we don't even know what his powers are even capable of. King Crimson's ability is to erase time, I guess. So it can erase an action so there is just the reaction. So for example,
golden wind, more like golden wind out of my ass. Get it? Like a fart.
So if I do this, I can remove the action of me where only the actions before and after the event occurred. So instead of the situation happening like this as it should, it happens like this. He also has a substand, Epitaph, that's powers are to see 10 seconds into the future. Long story short, this is the third villain in a row that can manipulate time, and it's also extremely busted. This is one of the most complicated stand abilities so far, and I don't fully understand how it works, and I don't think Araki does either. After that great battle between Bucciarati and King Crimson, Bucciarati escapes somehow with his life, but at the same time he doesn't. Bucciarati is dead. Kinda, but not really. He is alive, but he seems to not have any pain or feeling at this time. But we don't quite know what the fuck is wrong with him yet. So now that Bucciarati disobeyed the boss's orders, he is a traitor and will be hunted down and killed. Bucciarati makes an offer to everyone else in the crew to join Bucciarati and protect Trish, or stay back and continue to follow the boss. This is a huge choice for all the characters. It's a life or death situation. Everyone decides to join Bucciarati except for Narancia and Fugo. Once the rest of them leave, Narancia realizes that Trish is going through the same thing that he went through. He swims after the rest of them and decides to join Bucciarati, while yelling stuff like, "Her pain is my pain." I really like this scene. It really shows a lot about Narancia. He was freaking out trying to decide what to do, but he made his decision to protect Trish even if it cost him his life. Only Fugo was left behind. Fugo was a really cool character, and his stand Purple Haze was my favorite out of the groups. His stand represented the anger that was kept inside of him. I really like the idea of the stands being the personified soul of a person. Even though we have stands like Aerosmith, which is just an airplane. We only saw Purple Haze one time at this point, which was okay because it's not a stand that should be shown frequently. Anyway, Fugo stays behind. I sure hope he doesn't become completely irrelevant after this. Fuck it. I warned you about spoilers. Fugo just leaves the story and does not come back at all. Now, I didn't have an issue with Fugo staying behind, but I really wish the character came back in the end to help out his friends, but nope. He's gone. So underutilized and underdeveloped because he was only in the first half of the part. So the rest of the gang goes to try and find out the boss's identity. We learn that the boss has a separate personality, Doppio. Doppio is an innocent young boy who merely thinks that he is working for the boss. There's many theories out there about who Doppio is and what his relation is to the boss. It's a really interesting topic that adds a lot of depth to the boss's character. While the gang is split up and is searching for clues on the boss, Abbacchio is killed by him. Abbacchio was a really cool character and his death is sad. But like Fugo, I really wish he was used more. He again felt underutilized and underdeveloped. After getting a message from an unknown person wishing to help unmask the boss, the gang heads to Rome. After one of the best battles in the season with Cioccolata and Psycho, Bucciarati goes into the Colosseum where the person is said to meet. That person who sent the message was none other than Jean-Pierre Polnareff. I figured Polnareff was going to show up sometime after part 3 since he did survive, but here he is in all of his glory. I sure hope he is not turned into a turtle immediately and is kinda not really important. So something pretty cool was added to the JoJo stand lore. So in part 4 we found out about the stand arrows that grant people the ability of a stand. And it was also revealed that a person can be granted a second stand of sorts with a second piercing of the arrow. So here we have Silver Chariot Requiem, who is, I guess, an evolution of Silver Chariot. Anyway, everyone arrives at the Colosseum, including the boss himself. And here he is, the reveal of the one and only Diablo. This man is awesome. He is a man who keeps himself a total and complete mystery. No one, up to this point, knew who he was. He had no relationships with anyone, not his mother, not his daughter, no one. The scary thing about him is that he is understandable. Relationships, whatever they are hard. They leave you vulnerable. They end. They hurt. Diablo doesn't bother himself with them. So here we are introduced to Diablo, and everyone switches bodies. Yep, Chariot Requiem swaps everyone's bodies. I don't have a problem with this, it's just right when we are introduced to Diablo and we see Polnareff again, this happens. Now, no one knows where Diablo is, and they have to stop Chariot Requiem. But oh no, Diablo kills Narancia. Narancia's death was actually really sad. Unlike Fugo and Abbacchio, Narancia had enough time to make his death meaningful. They found out Diablo is in Trish's body. Well, Mista's body that also has Trish's soul in it. Diablo kills Chariot Requiem, and everyone goes back into their bodies. Bucciarati's body has been decaying since his fight with King Crimson, and now his body is gone, and Bucciarati dies. Bucciarati was the character that brought everyone else together. His death is a true loss in the story. Giarno and Diablo fight over the arrow, and Giarno stabs Gold Experience with it, becoming Gold Experience Requiem. I really like this idea of the arrow choosing Giarno over Diablo, but I don't really like how he just gains the powers out of nowhere. Gold Experience Requiem's ability is the opposite of King Crimson, where instead the outcome of the event is raced. So when he kills Diablo, Diablo's death never occurred. He just experiences death over and over. This death is quite brutal. Dio pretty much dies instantly, and Kira's actual death was instant too. So Diablo having to experience death over and over again until the end of time is quite terrifying. The whole fight between Giorno and Diablo is honestly a bit underwhelming. With all of the build-up for Diablo's reveal, the payoff did not feel worth it. The ending of the fight was great though, but that's not it. We get a few more episodes detailing an event that took place before the events of Part 5. This event details the encounters of the stand Rolling Stone. The stand predicts when someone is close to their death. The stand showed Bucciarati, meaning his death was near. But Mista destroyed the stone, and now it showed Bucciarati, Abbacchio, and Narancia, meaning their deaths would come soon as well. Since he chained Bucciarati's fate, he was able to stay alive longer than he was supposed to, which was after the King Crimson fight. I like the idea of fate that was added to the story, but this was weirdly paced. This flashback felt random and out of place. At least it should have been before the final fight. The end of the part sees Giarno becoming the new boss of the Passione. Golden Wind is a interesting part. Mostly everything was really good except for the few dumb things that I talked about that could have been worked around or could have been written better. This is still a really good story in the JoJo's saga, and it may not continue the story of part 3 or 4, but it's still worth your time. I'm going to give JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Golden Wind an 8 out of 10. Now I think it's time for me to rank every part, since this is the last JoJo review. I won't be going in depth, just briefly explain how I feel. So at the bottom is part 1, Phantom Blood. Not a bad story, it's still good. It's a nice little story that shows you what's next to come. At number 4 is part 2, Battle Tendency. Like part 1, part 2 was a nice little story that showed what's next to come. It had good characters and a good story. At number 3 is part 5, Golden Wind. You obviously know my thoughts on this from this video, but it was a really good story with great characters and a good adventure. And number 2 is part 4, Diamond is Unbreakable. Like I said in that review, this is probably the best part objectively so far, but I'm just not a big fan of the lighthearted nature and the slice of life style. And number 1 is part 3, Stardust Crusaders. I loved this part. I love the epic scale and the great characters and the adventure they go on in this part. It has many flaws, but I still think this part is great and is my favorite. Well, that was it for the JoJo reviews. It feels good to be done with them for now. But stay tuned for more anime reviews and eventually more JoJo reviews. This has been JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Golden Wind. Fuck you.